The chainsaw roared before she said a word. I froze halfway down the driveway, watching as Janet Pike, president of the Maple Ridge HOA, swung the blade toward my wife's flower bed like she was executing a sentence. "Unauthorized structure!" she shouted over the noise. "You were warned, Dr. Mercer. You can't plant that high. It violates Uniformity Code Section 7. Her voice was bright, almost cheerful, as if what she was doing was civic duty instead of madness. "Turn it off, Janet!" I yelled, my shoes slipping on gravel. She didn't. The saw bit into the wooden frame of the bed, splinters flying against Clara's legs. My wife stumbled backward, one hand gripping her belly. 7 months pregnant, barefoot, terrified, and still trying to shield her lilies. "Step back, ma'am," Janet barked. "This area is under removal order." "It's my yard," Clara screamed. "You can't—" A sharp crack drowned her out. The chain skipped, sparked against a stone edge, and slipped through fabric. The scream that came after didn't sound human. I was beside her in 3 seconds. The chain had sliced through the side of her calf, blood already blooming through her dress. Janet dropped the saw like it had bitten her. "Oh my God, I didn't mean—" "She moved," she stammered, eyes wide, face pale. "It was supposed to be a safety removal." "Safety?" I snapped, pressing my belt against Clara's leg. "You nearly killed her." She took a step back, still clutching her clipboard like a shield. "You people think you're above the rules because you're doctors. This community has standards." That's when I said it, the line that made her blink. "You're standing on private property, Janet. The HOA boundary ends at that stone border you just stepped over. I measured it myself the day we moved in." Her mouth opened, then shut. She looked down, realizing the neat gray stones she'd just kicked her heel over marked the legal limit of her power. "If you think HOA rules can't destroy lives, you're wrong. And before you scroll, hit subscribe, because by the time I finish this story, you'll understand how one neighbor's obsession with order ended in blood and national headlines." "My name's Dr. Eli Mercer," I said, keeping my hands steady as Clara gasped beneath me. "Chief of Emergency Surgery at St. Augustine Medical. That means I've spent 18 years fixing the damage people like you cause when they act without thinking." Janet blinked, her confidence faltering. "I didn't know—" "Of course you didn't," I said quietly. "You never ask what anyone does before you destroy it." Clara whimpered, fingers trembling against my sleeve. "Eli, please, don't let me lose her." She meant the baby, not her leg. I pressed harder, whispering, "Stay with me, love. I've got you." The lilies beside us were crushed, petals streaked red. She had planted them every spring, since our first miscarriage, said they were lucky, said they bloom for hope. Every time she watered them, she'd hum that same tune, the one I heard the night we found out we were finally having a girl. That flower bed wasn't just soil and wood. It was her piece, her proof she'd survived the years of loss. And now, it was a crime scene. I looked up at Janet. She was trembling, trying to justify herself. "It was reported unstable. It could have fallen—" "Reported by who?" I demanded. "You forged that notice, didn't you? The HOA never approved it. You wanted to make an example out of us because you can't stand anything that doesn't match your perfect catalog picture." She said nothing. The neighbors had started gathering, phones out, eyes wide, filming the blood on our porch stones. "You should have waited for city code enforcement," I said. "You should have followed the law." Her lips parted. "I am the law here." "No," I told her, my voice calm and surgical. "You're about to learn what the law really looks like." Sirens wailed in the distance. Clara's breathing slowed, but steadied. My hands were soaked, my mind already calculating trauma flow, compression time, tissue depth. I'd done this in war zones, but never in my own front yard. As the ambulance pulled up, I looked at Janet one last time. She was still standing there, frozen, clipboard dangling from her hand like a weapon gone cold. "You wanted control," I said. "Now you're going to answer to every authority you pretended to be." The paramedics rushed in. They knew me, recognized the voice, the uniform, the calm under panic. "Chief Mercer?" one asked. "What happened?" "HOA enforcement accident," I said flatly. "Pregnant trauma victim, laceration lower left leg, possible arterial nick. Move fast." As they loaded Clara, Janet whispered, "It wasn't supposed to go like this." "It never does," I said. "That's why people like me exist." And as we drove away, I saw her reflection in the rear window, small, shaking, realizing too late that she hadn't just broken a rule. She'd broken the one thing her rules could never replace: human decency. The ambulance jolted hard over a speed bump, and Clara cried out, clutching my hands so tight I felt the bones shift. "Easy," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady even as her skin turned paper white. The siren screamed overhead, drowning everything but the sound of her breathing. The medic across from me glanced up nervously. "We're losing pressure. Tourniquet's slipping." "Then tighten it," I ordered. "No, higher, above the knee. She's got a partial tear in the popliteal artery. If you miss the window, you lose the limb." He froze. I could see it, the fear of making the wrong move in front of the wrong man. "Sir, I didn't realize you were Chief of Emergency Surgery," I said, snapping open the IV kit myself. "Now, start a wide-bore line and push fluids. Keep her conscious." The driver shouted that we were 2 minutes out. I kept pressure on the wound, blood soaking through my gloves. "Stay with me, love," I murmured. "I've got you. You're both going to be fine." "Eli," she breathed, weak but still fighting. "Our daughter, she's listening," I said softly. "She just needs you to breathe." The hospital lights hit us like salvation. The doors burst open. My team was already waiting. Faces I'd trained, voices I trusted. "Dr. Mercer," one called. We heard the call come in. "What's the status?" "Pregnant trauma, leg laceration, major blood loss, possible fetal distress," I rattled off. "Page OB, get Trauma Bay 2 ready." They didn't question me. That's the strange thing about leadership. You spend years earning the kind of respect you wish you never had to use. The gurney rolled through sliding glass, down the sterile hall, the smell of antiseptic and adrenaline mixing into something electric. Every footstep echoed like a countdown. "Clamp ready, sutures prepped, cross-match O-neg," I said as we reached the bay. "Eli, you can't—" My chief resident, Dr. Larson, grabbed my shoulder. "You can't operate on your wife." I looked at him, not blinking. "Then find me someone who can do it faster." He hesitated, then nodded. "You lead from the observation deck. We'll run it exactly as you say." They wheeled her behind the glass. I stripped off the gloves and threw them in the bin, my hands trembling for the first time all day. From behind the barrier, I became two people, the surgeon giving orders and the husband watching a life bleed out. "Pressure holding," Larson said over the intercom. "Heart rate stabilizing, fetal monitors erratic, OB en route." "Keep her under light anesthesia," I replied. "Don't risk the baby's oxygen levels. You'll need to deliver first." "Deliver?" someone repeated. "She's in shock. She won't survive a full vascular repair unless you relieve the fetal pressure first." Larson met my eyes through the glass. He understood. Minutes later, the curtain of chaos split into two miracles. One cry, sharp and alive, then silence as they moved back to her leg. They worked for 3 hours. I never sat down, never blinked longer than a second. When it was over, Larson stepped out, sweat soaking through his scrubs. "She's alive," he said quietly. "So is your daughter. But we couldn't save the lower leg." For a long moment, I didn't speak. I just stared through the glass at Clara's sleeping face. The relief hit like collapse. "You did good," I whispered. When I walked into the recovery room, she was pale but conscious. The newborn was in an incubator beside her, tiny fingers curled like promises. Clara turned her head, tears spilling silently. "Is she okay?" "She's perfect," I said, sitting beside her. Strong lungs, good reflex, she fought. She looked down at the covered stump of her leg. "And me?" "You fought harder," I said. "You'll walk again. I'll make sure of it." She nodded slowly, eyes unfocused. "Why did she do it, Eli? What did we ever do to her?" I didn't answer. I was thinking of Janet Pike standing in my yard, clutching her clipboard, pretending to be the law. Later that night, I stood in the hospital corridor alone. The security chief approached quietly. "Dr. Mercer, we have the ambulance cam footage if you need it for legal reporting. Shows her stepping past the boundary markers before the accident." I nodded once. "Make a copy for the police and lock the original in the evidence archive." He hesitated. "You want me to release a statement? It's going to hit the press soon." "Not yet," I said. "Let the system see what she called enforcement. Then we'll speak." As he walked away, I caught my reflection in the glass. Blood still on my collar, eyes hollow but burning. I wasn't just a surgeon anymore. I was a witness. And if Maple Ridge thought they could bury this under HOA minutes and fake apologies, they had no idea who they'd just put on the record. By the time the footage reached the HOA office, Ryan Holt had already played it 3 times. Each replay left him paler, shoulders caving further under the fluorescent hum. The video showed everything. Janet Pike stepping over the stone border, revving the saw, shouting, "Official removal," before the scream cut through the mic. The timestamp glared on the corner of the screen like a wound that wouldn't close. He sat alone at the long oak table, the one where board members usually bickered about paint shades and mailbox placement. His hands rested flat, fingers twitching once, then stilling. Every muscle in his jaw worked like he was chewing guilt. He'd voted to approve that maintenance removal order, though he'd never actually seen a city permit. He'd trusted Janet. Everyone did. Outside, the blinds were half closed, slits of sunlight cutting across the framed Excellence in Community Service award that hung crooked on the wall. It looked like satire now. Ryan leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He could already hear Janet's voice echoing from earlier that morning. "We handle this internally. No one calls the city, no one contacts the press. It was an accident." But it hadn't looked like an accident. It had looked like command. The office door swung open. Janet strode in, hair pinned tight, perfume sharp enough to sting. "You watched it?" she asked, voice clipped. Ryan nodded once. He didn't trust his voice yet. "Well," she said, forcing a tight smile, "then you understand why we need to keep this under control. The footage will look worse than it is." He looked up slowly. "It looks like you attacked her, Janet." Her smile vanished. "Don't be dramatic." The chain slipped. "You saw how she stepped forward. The Mercers are going to milk this for sympathy, and we need to protect the community's reputation." Ryan's fingers curled against the tabletop. He wanted to look her in the eye, but his neck refused. Instead, he stared at the edge of his clipboard, at the initials JP scribbled on the fake authorization letter she'd made him sign. His stomach turned. "That form you gave me," he said quietly. "You told me it came from the county maintenance office." "It did," she said quickly. "Or close enough. They use the same format." "That's not what I asked." Janet's heels clicked against the tile as she walked closer. "You think this is the time to question me? You were there when they mocked us, Ryan. The judge husband with his fancy credentials, acting like rules don't apply. If we let them defy us, the whole HOA collapses." He swallowed, throat dry. "You mean your control collapses?" She stopped inches from him. "Be careful." He finally met her gaze. Her pupils were sharp, fevered, desperate. He could see the reflection of the paused video in her eyes, the split second before impact. "People saw you, Janet. Neighbors filmed it. It's already online." She waved a hand dismissively. "Half of them owe me favors. I'll tell them to take it down. You just keep the board quiet." "I'm not sure I can." "Yes, you can," she snapped. "You'll remind them that HOA insurance doesn't cover lawsuits caused by resident interference. If Mercer sues, everyone pays. Do you want to bankrupt your own neighbors?" Her logic twisted like barbed wire. Ryan's hands trembled under the table. He clasped them together, forcing stillness. His voice came out low. "You're asking me to lie to protect you." "I'm asking you to protect us," she said softly, leaning in. "Maple Ridge survives because we stay united. Once you start questioning leadership, everything falls apart." When she left, her perfume lingered like smoke. The door clicked shut, and Ryan slumped forward, elbows on the table, head in his hands. The silence pressed heavy against his ribs. Through the blinds, he watched the cul-de-sac below. 2 kids riding bikes, a mother walking her dog. Normal life, untouched by what had happened 3 streets over. He rubbed his thumb against a dark spot on the table, like he could erase something that had already stained him. He'd built his life on Maple Ridge. 3 years of HOA service, quiet reputation, property value rising. He'd convinced himself the rules meant safety. Now they just felt like chains. His phone buzzed with a new message. "Meeting at 6. We'll decide what to tell police." "Janet?" He stared at it for a long time, then glanced back at the paused video frame, the moment before the blade hit. His own reflection looked sickly in the screen. He thought of Clara's scream, of Eli kneeling in, blood, of the clipboard falling from Janet's hand. When he finally stood, his chair screeched against the floor. He moved stiffly, as if guilt had weight. his shoulders hunched, eyes darting to the hallway. For a second, he almost went to delete the footage. Almost. But his fingers stopped above the keyboard, shaking. Instead, he copied the file onto a flash drive and slipped it into his jacket pocket. His breath came fast, uneven. "God forgive me," he muttered. Then he turned off the lights, leaving the office dark except for the faint glow of the paused video. Janet Pike frozen mid-swing, proof waiting to be seen. By the time I walked back into Maple Ridge, the neighborhood looked different. Not physically, same trimmed hedges, same spotless driveways. But there was something hollow under the silence. People waved from porches like nothing had happened, but their eyes followed me too long. Word had spread. Doctor's wife lost her leg. HOA accident. Lawsuit incoming. Rumors moved faster than ambulances. I parked in front of the clubhouse, the glass walls reflecting a perfect suburban afternoon that felt anything but perfect. Inside, through the tinted windows, I could already see them. Janet Pike standing at the head of the long table, papers spread like battle plans. 6 board members sat stiff around her, faces caught between loyalty and fear. When I opened the door, the conversation froze. "Dr. Mercer," Janet said, her tone falsely bright. "We weren't expecting you." "Seems that's a pattern," I replied. I stepped closer, my shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "I just came from the hospital. My wife's alive, the baby too." No one spoke. Ryan Holt sat halfway down the table, shoulders tense, eyes locked on the papers in front of him. His hand tapped a pen against the surface, rhythmic, nervous, like he was counting heartbeats. Janet gestured to an empty chair. "Please sit. We were just drafting a community statement about the incident." I looked at the printed headline in front of her. HOA maintenance mishap, cooperative resolution pending. The words made my teeth ache. Mishap, I repeated slowly. "That's what we're calling it now?" "Dr. Mercer," she began, tone soft and maternal. "None of us wanted this. It was a tragic misunderstanding, but you have to understand, you were in violation." "Violation?" I cut in. "The flower bed was inside my property line. You stepped over it. That's trespassing." A murmur ran through the room. Janet's smile thinned. "We all know lines on a map can be interpreted differently." Ryan's pen stopped tapping. His hand twitched once, then tightened around it until his knuckles whitened. He didn't look up, but his jaw flexed hard enough to shake. "Let me be very clear," I said. "Your actions weren't a misunderstanding. They were illegal. I have ambulance footage showing you ordering a removal, without authorization." Janet's chin lifted, confidence flickering back like a pilot flame. "You can't use that footage publicly. It was taken during a private HOA operation." I almost laughed. "You think a power tool attack counts as an HOA operation?" She took a step toward me, lowering her voice. "You're emotional, understandably. But this community has a reputation. Lawsuits, police reports, they damage everyone, not just the board. We could find a quiet solution." There it was, the offer. The silence money disguised as sympathy. I leaned forward just enough that the edge of the table pressed against my palms. "You want me to keep quiet while my wife relearns how to walk?" Ryan finally looked up. His eyes met mine for a second, haunted, guilty, pleading. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again when Janet shot him a sharp glance. I shifted my gaze to him deliberately. "You were at that meeting when the authorization letter was signed, weren't you, Ryan?" He froze. Yes, but I didn't." Janet cut in fast. "The board approved maintenance unanimously." Ryan's leg bounced under the table, his hands folding and unfolding like he didn't know what to do with them. He wasn't defending her, he was trying to stay invisible. I exhaled slowly. "You forged a county document, Janet. You impersonated a city inspector. And you think this can be handled with a statement?" She bristled. "Be careful, doctor. Accusations like that are facts," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Because unlike you, I keep records." I placed it face up on the table and hit play. The audio from the body cam filled the room, her voice sharp and unmistakable. "Official removal. This property violates HOA structure code," followed by the chainsaw's growl and my wife's scream. The room went still. One woman at the far end covered her mouth. Ryan's pen rolled off the table, clattering onto the floor. Janet paled but straightened fast. "That recording's inadmissible. You're breaching privacy laws." "Tell that to the police," I said quietly. "They already have a copy." Ryan blinked at that, his fingers trembling against the tabletop. He looked between us like a man watching a fuse burn. Janet turned to the others. "We need unity, not panic. This family is exploiting tragedy for attention." "Unity?" I said. "You mean silence." No one answered. The meeting collapsed into uneasy breathing. I stood, sliding my phone back into my pocket. "Enjoy the rest of your session. I'll be seeing you again, just not in this room." As I walked out, Ryan's voice finally cracked through the air, small but shaking. "Janet, maybe we should call the county, clear this up officially." She glared at him like he'd just committed treason. "Sit down." But his hands stayed flat on the table, fingertips twitching like he wanted to run. I saw it, the start of fracture. Guilt making room for truth. Outside, the sunlight hit my face, and for the first time since the accident, I smiled without meaning to. The system was already stirring, and I had just given it its first pulse. The next morning, I was back at St. Augustine Medical, not as chief, but as husband. Clara was awake, pale but lucid, cradling our daughter against her chest. The monitors hummed softly. Outside her room, a pair of reporters lingered near the nurse's station, whispering my name like a headline they weren't supposed to say yet. "She's been sleeping most of the night," the nurse told me quietly. "Vitals are stable. She's stronger than she looks." "She always has been," I said, stepping inside. Clara's eyes opened when she heard my voice. "Eli," she whispered, smiling faintly. "They said you were at some meeting yesterday." "I was," I admitted. "The board tried to call it an accident." Her hand tightened around mine. "She almost killed me." "I know." I brushed a lock of hair from her forehead. "And I'm not letting her rewrite that story." Before she could answer, a knock came at the door. It was Detective Mara Quinn, short, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who looked like she'd forgotten how to smile a decade ago. "Dr. Mercer," she said, "we need to talk." I followed her out into the corridor. The air smelled like coffee and antiseptic, and every passing nurse slowed when they recognized me. Mara flipped open her notepad. "We received the ambulance footage you submitted. Pretty clear case of recklessness, maybe even criminal negligence. But the HOA president's already filed her own report. Claims your wife interfered during emergency removal." I stared at her. "She's trying to call it self-defense?" "Not quite. More like procedural miscommunication." Mara's tone was dry. "Problem is, the HOA's insurance lawyers are already circling. If this stays he said she said, it's going to get messy fast." "I have audio of her giving the order," I said, "and a boundary survey proving she was off HOA property." "That helps, but to press felony charges we'll need pattern evidence, prior harassment, intent, or forgery. Something that shows it wasn't just stupidity." I hesitated. Ryan Holt's face flashed in my mind, his trembling hands, the guilt that wouldn't stop twitching. "There's a vice president on that board who knows more than he's saying?" "Then get him talking," she said simply. "Because right now, all we've got is a chainsaw and chaos." When she left, I stood in the hall for a long time. I wasn't just fighting Janet anymore. I was fighting the machinery that let people like her hide behind committees and clauses. That night, I logged into the hospital's legal database to review my own filing, but something else caught my attention: the ambulance's black box data. Most people didn't know they even had them. Every emergency vehicle in the county stored internal audio, synced with GPS logs. I requested access under my medical oversight clearance. Within minutes, the file opened, a perfect uncut record of the scene. I hit play. Janet Pike. "This is an official removal. Step back." Unidentified male neighbor. "She's pregnant, for God's sake." Chainsaw noise, metallic impact, screaming. Then, beneath the chaos, faint but clear, "Get this on video. The board needs proof we acted." Proof we acted, not proof of danger, not proof of violation. Proof we acted. It was enough. She'd incriminated herself. I exhaled slowly and backed up the data to my drive. The timing matched the HOA's own fake maintenance order to the second. The next morning, I called Detective Quinn. "You wanted intent? You've got it. I'm sending you something." She listened to the clip in silence. "That's solid," she said finally. We can subpoena the HOA's internal communications now. If Pike forged any orders, we'll find them. Start with her vice president, I said. He won't talk on record, but he'll fold if you pressure him. I'll need your statement for the record first, she added. When? Now. I spent 2 hours in the hospital conference room dictating every detail, the fake notices, the meeting, the forged authorization. My voice stayed steady, even when I described the sound of the chain hitting bone. By the end, Mara shut her notebook and gave me a look that wasn't pity, more like respect. You know, she said, most people crumble after something like this. You seem methodical. I've spent my life in trauma bays, I said quietly. You don't freeze when someone's bleeding. You act. She nodded. Then keep acting. You're helping your own case more than any lawyer could. After she left, I walked back to Clara's room. She was sleeping again, our daughter tucked against her shoulder, the soft hiss of oxygen filling the silence. I looked at them both and felt something new. Not rage, not grief. Calculation. Janet Pike thought she could turn paperwork into armor. She didn't realize she'd just handed a surgeon the scalpel. The system was awake now, and this time I was operating on it. By the time I left the hospital, the evening sky over Maple Ridge had turned the color of bruised metal. I parked at the far edge of the cul-de-sac where the HOA's maintenance trucks used to line up, their logos now stripped away under police order. The neighborhood looked still, but beneath that quiet was a pulse. I could feel it in the way curtains shifted when I passed, the way porch lights flicked on too early. I wasn't here for them. I was here for Ryan Holt. His house sat near the lake, modern and spotless. The kind of place that looked staged for a brochure. When he opened the door, his face said everything. Exhaustion, fear, and that unmistakable twitch in his hands again. Dr. Mercer, he said, voice low, you shouldn't be here. Neither should she have been, I replied. We need to talk. He hesitated, glancing down the street as if Janet herself might appear. Then he stepped aside. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish and stress. On the table sat a half-finished whiskey glass beside his laptop, the HOA portal still open. You've seen the news? I asked. He nodded. They're saying it was an accident, that she panicked. Is that what you saw? He looked at the floor, rubbing his thumb over the rim of the glass. I saw her lose control, he murmured. But it didn't start there. She'd been getting worse, angrier, ever since you joined the community. Because I didn't bow, I said. Ryan gave a small, broken laugh. Because you made her feel small. He walked to the window, arms folded. She forged that maintenance order. I knew it. I just didn't stop her. There it was, the crack in the wall. I stepped closer. Why didn't you? He exhaled, shoulders sagging. I thought she'd calm down once you complied. Then she showed me the authorization letter, said it was verified by county code. I noticed the signature line was blank. When I asked, she said the inspector gave verbal approval. He turned back to me, eyes rimmed red. You know how many fines she's covered up? How many fake citations she's printed to scare residents into paying? I believe it, I said quietly. She keeps everything on a private drive, he went on. HOA records, fake permits, everything. But she's paranoid, uses a separate laptop, only connects it at the clubhouse. You can get me in? He froze. You want to hack her system? That's not hack, I interrupted. Access. You're vice president. You have credentials. He hesitated, staring at his own reflection in the dark window. If she finds out, she'll ruin me. My house, my job, everything. She already has, I said. You think she won't scapegoat you next? Her report lists you as the authorizing officer. His eyes widened. What? She filed her version with the police, claims you approved the removal order. The blood drained from his face. He sank into the chair, hands gripping the edge until his knuckles went white. She can't do that. She already did. He stared at nothing for a long time, then reached for the laptop. His fingers hovered above the keys before curling into fists. If I give you access and this backfires, it won't, I said. But if you don't, she'll walk free and you'll take the fall. You're the only one who can prove her intent. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, finally, he typed. The HOA portal flickered and a secondary login window appeared. Admin archive, Pike Master. He entered a string of characters I didn't recognize, then turned the screen toward me. "That's as far as I can go without tripping her security alert," he said. "But if you pull the system logs right now, you'll see the timestamp of the forged file creation." I clicked through the records. Every document had metadata, dates, edits, authors. The maintenance order that authorized the removal created 2 days before the incident. User, Janet Pike. Admin. I copied the directory to an encrypted drive, then ejected it. Ryan's hands shook so badly the whiskey glass rattled. "Detective Quinn will subpoena this," I said. "You won't be charged. You'll be a witness." He nodded weakly, eyes darting toward the door like he expected her to burst through. "She'll know I talked." "She'll suspect," I corrected. "But by the time she does, it won't matter." I stood, pocketing the drive. "You did the right thing, Ryan." He laughed bitterly. "Feels more like the last thing." As I left, the night air hit cold. Across the street, a porch light flickered twice, then went dark. Someone watching, someone afraid. I slid into my car and looked at the drive in my hand. Inside, it was everything the system needed. Forged authorizations, timestamps, signatures. The scalpel was ready. Now, all that remained was the incision. The next morning, I found Ryan Holt sitting in his car outside the hospital parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel like he'd been there all night. His tie was loosened, eyes bloodshot. A man strung between guilt and survival. When he saw me, he stepped out fast, scanning the lot as though the shadows might be recording him. "She knows," he said quietly. "Janet knows someone accessed her drive." I motioned him toward the coffee stand near the ambulance bay, away from security cameras. "How?" "She called me at 2 a.m., he said, voice trembling. Didn't accuse me directly, but she said her system registered unauthorized admin activity. She's going to claim I tampered with records to frame her. That was faster than I expected. Janet Pike wasn't just paranoid, she was cornered. "You didn't delete anything," I said. "She can't prove tampering if the files were copied, not modified." "She doesn't need proof," Ryan whispered. "She's already telling the board I went rogue. They're turning on me. You have to understand, I didn't sign up for any of this. I joined the HOA to keep things orderly, not to—" He stopped, hands shaking. "Not to cover for a psychopath." He looked at me then, truly looked, and I could see the exhaustion behind his eyes, the kind that came from carrying someone else's crimes too long. "Ryan," I said carefully, "if you want to survive this, you need to give me everything, the real story, every decision she made, every threat she used. No summaries, truth." He hesitated, his thumb rubbing the edge of his coffee cup until it buckled. "You'll use it against her?" "I'll give it to the detective," I said. "That's how you clear your name." He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath since the day of the accident. Then he spoke. "She's been forging enforcement notices for months, not just yours. She'd print fake citations and tack them to people's doors before board votes. It made residents think the board was stricter than it was, so they'd re-elect her to keep the peace. The official letterheads, they weren't from the county. She had a stash of blank municipal templates from when she used to work in code enforcement." He took another shaky sip. "Then she started using them to scare people into compliance. She'd threaten fines, property liens, sometimes send maintenance crews onto private lots just to intimidate folks. Half of them thought she had real authority." I nodded. "And the removal order for my property?" "She drafted it herself," he said. "She told us you were a liability, said your unauthorized structure could void community insurance coverage. When I asked to see the permit number, she snapped, said it was confidential. Then she shoved the clipboard at me and told me to sign, said it was just a formality." "And you did?" He nodded miserably. "I did. I didn't think she'd actually show up with a chainsaw. God, I thought it was just another empty threat." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the hospital filled the silence. Sirens, heels clicking, the world moving on while our small war tightened around us. Ryan broke the quiet. "There's something else," he said. "After the accident, she made me draft an email to the board's insurance rep, claiming the Mercers were obstructing a scheduled safety procedure. She dictated every word. Then she told me to delete the thread after sending it, but I didn't." I straightened. "You still have it?" He nodded. "Printed copy, locked in my filing cabinet at home." "That's intent," I said. proof she tried to rewrite the event before investigators arrived. Ryan looked terrified. If I hand that over, I'm done here. She'll destroy me. Or you'll destroy her first, I countered. You want to spend the rest of your life being the man who signed someone's amputation into history? He flinched, staring at the pavement. Then he nodded, slow but firm. You'll get it. All of it. I checked my watch. Detective Quinn's at the precinct by 9. Meet us there. He hesitated. If I walk into that building, I can't go back to Maple Ridge. Good, I said. No one deserves to live under her rules. That afternoon, he arrived with a thin envelope, hands trembling as he passed it to the detective. Inside were the printed emails, timestamps intact. The final one read, "If anyone asks, the resident resisted HOA enforcement. This was not negligence, this was procedure." When Quinn looked up from reading it, her tone changed. "That's the nail," she said. "Forgery, coercion, false documentation. It's over for her." Ryan looked like he might collapse. "What happens now?" Quinn closed the folder. "Now we move." As Ryan left the station, I saw his shoulders lift for the first time, like a man stepping out from under years of weight. He'd crossed the line from accomplice to witness, and with that, our case had its spine. Detective Mara Quinn didn't waste time once Ryan's statement hit her desk. By noon, she had 2 uniformed officers standing outside the Maple Ridge HOA office with a warrant in hand. I wasn't supposed to be there, but she'd called me that morning. "You might want to see this," she'd said. "You're technically our primary witness, and I prefer first-hand context over paperwork." So I drove straight from the hospital, leaving Clara with her physical therapist and our daughter asleep beside her. For the first time in weeks, she'd looked peaceful. I owed her more than recovery. I owed her justice. The HOA building stood small but smug, a glass box at the edge of the lake. Its sign still gleamed, Maple Ridge Community Board, ES2 1998. Beneath it, the flower beds were freshly trimmed, as if manicured guilt could erase what had happened. When I walked in, Janet Pike was already there, cornered but still posturing. Her hair was perfect, her blazer pressed, that same clipboard in her hand like a weapon of ritual. "Detective," she said coolly. "I trust this intrusion has a reason." Quinn held up the warrant. "We're here to seize electronic records and communication logs related to HOA enforcement activities for the last 12 months. You can cooperate or make this unpleasant." Janet laughed, a brittle, practiced sound. "You're wasting resources. I've already submitted everything relevant. The rest is confidential homeowner data." "Funny," Quinn said, glancing toward me, "because your vice president just testified that you've been forging official notices using municipal templates. That makes it public evidence, not private." For the first time, Janet's smile faltered. "Ryan Holt is lying to save himself. He's unstable." "Then you won't mind us checking the files." Quinn motioned to the officers. One stepped past her to the office computer, while the other took photos of the walls, certificates, awards, framed meeting minutes. I stayed near the doorway, watching Janet's composure chip away piece by piece. She crossed her arms tightly, fingers digging into her sleeves. "You brought the doctor too?" she snapped. "This is harassment." "I'm here as a witness," I said evenly, "and as the victim of your so-called procedure." Her eyes flashed. "Procedure keeps this neighborhood functioning, Dr. Mercer. If people like you followed the rules, none of this would have happened." "You mean, if people like me didn't question your power? You think because you have a title, you're untouchable. But communities crumble when individuals think they're above order." "Order," I repeated quietly. "You call mutilation order?" The officer interrupted. "Detective, there's an external drive plugged into her computer." Janet's head jerked toward the desk. "That's personal." "Unplug it," Quinn said. The screen lit up. Rows of folders filled the display, all labeled with dates, addresses, and names. One caught my eye. Mercer Property. Removal final. Quinn leaned in, scrolling. Inside were PDFs, authorization letters, HOA meeting minutes, and digital signatures. But one file stopped everything cold. Pike, EC Statement Draft, .docx. She opened it. The document's first line read, "In the event of injury during enforcement, responsibility lies with resident interference. All actions taken under Emergency Community Safety Clause." Below it were revisions tracked in red, notes from Janet herself. "Rephrase to sound neutral. Omit reference to SAW. Add that Mercer became hostile." The detective's pen scratched across her notepad. "Well," she said dryly, "looks like we found your intent and your cover-up in one place." Janet lunged forward, but the officer blocked her. "You can't take that out of context. It's an internal draft. Every organization prepares statements." Quinn looked unimpressed. "Internal drafts don't usually start by assigning blame before an investigation." Janet's mask finally cracked. Her voice rose, sharp and desperate. "You don't understand. He mocked this board, undermined my authority. Do you think I could just stand by while he turned the neighborhood against me?" Her words echoed too long in the quiet room. Even the officer taking photographs stopped. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She just confessed motive. Quinn turned to her calmly. "Thank you, Ms. Pike. That'll be helpful in court." Janet's face drained of color. That wasn't a confession. It was close enough. Outside, neighbors had started gathering, drawn by the sight of patrol cars. Through the glass, I saw phones raised, recording, whispering, finally seeing the woman they'd feared reduced to silence. As the officers escorted her out, she hissed under her breath, "You think this ends me? The HOA is bigger than one name." I met her gaze. "Then it'll fall with yours." When the door closed behind her, Quinn turned to me. "We've got everything we need. Fraud, falsification, attempted obstruction. The prosecutor's going to love this." I nodded, staring at the empty chair where Janet had stood moments before. It felt strange, victory not as satisfaction, but as surgery completed. The infection was gone, but the scar would stay. "Doctor," Quinn said, snapping me from thought, "I hope you're ready. This is going to trial." "I've been ready," I told her, since the day she picked up that chainsaw. Outside, the wind stirred the lake, scattering ripples that caught the late sun like shards of glass. For the first time, Maple Ridge looked less like a neighborhood, and more like a recovery ward. The trial moved faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks of the warrant, the state of Florida versus Janet Pike was officially on the docket. Every local outlet covered it. HOA president faces felony assault, suburban nightmare, chainsaw Karen. The story had outgrown Maple Ridge. Now it was a national symbol of what happens when control turns into obsession. I sat in the courthouse lobby the morning of the pre-trial hearing, coffee cooling in my hands. The hallway buzzed with reporters, lawyers, and residents craning for a glimpse of the woman who once fined them for leaving garbage cans out too long. Janet walked in flanked by her attorney, head high, expression carved from porcelain. But under the lights the cracks showed, her pupils darting, fingers twitching around a paperclip she kept flicking open and closed. Detective Mara Quinn approached me quietly. "You holding up?" "Fine," I said. "She won't plead out, will she?" "Not likely," Quinn replied. "Her lawyer's betting on accidental negligence. They'll try to spin it as a botched safety inspection." I almost laughed. She's still pretending she was saving the neighborhood. "That's the story she's built her whole life on," Quinn said. "People like her don't admit they lost control. They rebrand it." The bailiff called us in. Inside, the courtroom felt colder than the hospital operating rooms I'd spent my life in. The prosecutor, Elaine Voss, was sharp and deliberate, every word cutting like a scalpel. Ryan Holt sat near the front row, pale but resolute. When our eyes met, he nodded, a small, unspoken acknowledgement that this was bigger than either of us now. The judge entered. "State versus Pike," he said, scanning the room. "Charges: aggravated assault with a deadly tool, forgery, and obstruction of justice." Janet's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client deeply regrets the tragic accident, but maintains she was performing her duties as mandated by the community charter." Voss didn't even blink. "By wielding a chainsaw on private property?" "Some duties, counselor." The room murmured. The judge motioned for quiet. When I took the stand, the world narrowed to a single voice. Mine. The oath felt heavier than usual, not because I hadn't done it before, but because this time it was personal. "Dr. Mercer," Voss began, "you were present during the incident?" "Yes." "Describe what you saw." Janet Pike crossed my property line, declared a removal order, and activated a running chainsaw within 5 feet of my pregnant wife. She made no attempt to stop until the chain had already struck her. "Did you issue any warnings or hear any from Ms. Pike?" I shouted for her to stop. She told my wife to step back because it was official business. Janet's attorney objected, claiming hearsay. Overruled, Voss continued. After the event, did Ms. Pike attempt to assist your wife? No, I said. She dropped the saw and tried to justify herself. Voss approached the evidence table. Your Honor, Exhibit 14. Audio recovered from the ambulance recording. It captures Ms. Pike instructing others to get this on video. The board needs proof we acted. The recording played. The courtroom went silent. Janet's own voice filled the air, commanding, detached, followed by Clara's scream. A few jurors flinched. Janet's lawyer stood again, desperate. Those words could have been misinterpreted. She was referring to documenting property removal, not injury, Voss countered smoothly. Then why the phrase, proof we acted? Not proof it was unsafe, not proof of compliance, proof they acted. Because in her mind, action equaled authority. Ryan Holt was called next. His hands trembled as he raised them for the oath. He avoided Janet's eyes completely. She told me to forge the authorization, he said quietly. Said the inspector had given verbal approval. I knew it wasn't true. Why sign it? The prosecutor asked. Because she threatened to report me to the state for falsifying HOA financials. A lie she made up. She used fear to keep us loyal. The judge nodded, expression grim. Continue. Ryan glanced at me, then back to the jury. The night after it happened, she made me write an email blaming the Mercers for obstructing a safety order. I printed a copy before deleting it. Voss held it up. This document is time-stamped 4 hours after the assault. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Janet's attorney buried his face in his notes. When the recess was called, the press stormed the hallway, shouting questions. I kept walking. Quinn caught up with me outside the courthouse. You just buried her, she said. I didn't, I replied. She did. Behind us, through the glass doors, I caught one last glimpse of Janet Pike, alone at the defense table, mask gone, her clipboard confiscated, her hands finally empty. By evening, every channel carried the story. I watched from Clara's hospital room as the headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Maple Ridge HOA trial uncovers systemic abuse. Former president faces maximum sentence. Clara reached for my hand. It's really happening, she whispered. It is, I said softly. The system's doing what it's supposed to, for once. Outside, the night was quiet. For the first time in months, Maple Ridge wasn't ruled by fear. It was ruled by truth. The verdict came down on a Monday morning, the kind of cloudless Florida day that made Maple Ridge look almost innocent again. The courthouse lawn was packed. Reporters, residents, even old HOA members who once defended Janet Pike's every decision, now pretending they'd never met her. Flashbulbs popped like artillery as we stepped out of the car. Beside me, Detective Mara Quinn adjusted her blazer and nodded toward the entrance. You ready for this, Doctor? I've been ready since the day she started the engine, I said. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. The judge took his seat, papers stacked neatly before him. Janet sat across the room in a pale gray suit, thinner now, eyes dull but still searching for someone to blame. The same clipboard she'd once wielded like a badge of power now lay sealed in an evidence box beside the clerk. When the bailiff called for order, even the cameras went quiet. On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly tool, the judge read, we find the defendant guilty. No gasp, no outburst, just silence. The next line followed like a gavel to the ribs. On the charges of forgery, falsification of public documents, and obstruction of justice, guilty on all counts. Janet's head snapped toward her attorney. Appeal it, she hissed, but her voice cracked mid-word. The judge continued, unfazed. Sentencing recommendation, 11 years without parole. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was a collective exhale, months of fear leaving the room all at once. I didn't move, didn't smile. I just watched her expression crumble piece by piece until there was nothing left but disbelief. When the session adjourned, Quinn leaned in. It's over. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. The damage she built outlived her. Outside, reporters surged forward, microphones crowding the courthouse steps. Dr. Mercer, do you have a statement? One shouted. What would you say to HOA presidents across the country after this verdict? I stopped halfway down the stairs, the afternoon sun cutting across my face. I'd say power without accountability isn't order, It's chaos dressed in paperwork, I said. And if you use that power to hurt others, you'd better pray the law gets to you before someone like me does. Quinn gave a small smirk beside me. You practice that one? I shrugged. Only in my head for 3 months. Ryan Holt stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, avoiding the cameras. He looked lighter, but older, like the truth had aged him overnight. I walked over. You did the right thing, I said. I waited too long to do it, he replied. But at least it's done. He hesitated, then asked quietly, Do you ever stop hearing it, the sound? I knew what he meant, the scream, the chain, the half-second when everything changed. No, I said. You just make sure it never happens again. He nodded and walked away, swallowed by the crowd. Later that afternoon, I returned to the hospital. Clara had been cleared for physical therapy that week. Her wheelchair sat beside the bed, sunlight spilling across the blanket that covered her prosthetic. Our daughter slept in a bassinet nearby, one hand curled in her tiny dream. They said it's over, she whispered when I walked in. I saw the broadcast. It's over for her, I said, sitting beside her. But not for us. We rebuild now. Her eyes glistened. Did she even look sorry? No, I said truthfully. Just surprised she wasn't untouchable. For a long moment, we sat in silence, listening to the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator down the hall. Then she said softly, You should tell your story, Eli, not for revenge, for prevention. People need to know how fast order turns to cruelty. I will, I said, when you're walking again. That night, I met Quinn in the hospital courtyard. She was off duty but still carried the posture of someone always working. Media's going to want an exclusive, she said. You want to go public? I don't want fame, I said. I want policy. She raised a brow. HOA boards handle thousands of properties with almost no oversight, I continued. We're going to change that. Mandatory state review for enforcement orders, property line verification before any action. If my wife had died, we'd be talking about murder instead of reform. Quinn looked impressed. You really don't stop operating, do you? Not until the infection's out, I said. The courtyard lights flickered on, reflecting in the pond beside us. Somewhere behind the glass, Clara laughed softly at something a nurse said. For the first time, it didn't sound like pain. It sounded like beginning. I glanced at Quinn. You helped us get here. Don't disappear when the headlines do. I won't, she said, but this next part's yours, doctor. I looked up at the hospital windows glowing warm against the night. Then I'll make it count. Janet Pike had built her kingdom on fear and paperwork. I would build something better, something that healed. The first public town meeting after the trial was held in the Maple Ridge Community Pavilion, a place that used to host bake sales and barbecues, but now looked more like a courtroom without walls. Rows of folding chairs filled the field, every seat taken. Reporters set up tripods near the back. Residents who once whispered about me now sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the man whose wife's blood had rewritten their bylaws. A new interim board sat up front under a banner that read, Maple Ridge Reform Session, Open Community Forum. No one dared occupy Janet Pike's old seat, though the chair remained, a ghost at the table. Detective Mara Quinn stood near the side, off-duty but observant, hands folded behind her back. Ryan Holt was there too, sitting 2 rows up, glancing between me and the microphone stand like he wasn't sure which of us deserved to be there more. When the chairperson called my name, I walked to the front, feeling every eye track me. The microphone squealed once, then went silent. I wasn't planning to speak, I began, but silence is what let this happen. A murmur moved through the crowd, agreement, maybe guilt. You all watch Maple Ridge turn into a rule book with teeth, I said. You watched your neighbors fined for porch lights, for paint shades, for flower beds, until someone thought she had the right to enforce obedience with a chainsaw. The air tightened. I saw heads lower. One woman in the back wiped her eyes. I'm not here to relive it, I continued. I'm here to make sure it never happens again. My wife, Clara, is alive. She's in physical therapy now, and our daughter's thriving. But if you think that's where this ends, if you think justice is just a courtroom verdict, you're wrong. Justice means accountability that lasts. The interim chairperson nodded for me to continue. I stepped closer to the edge of the platform. I've filed a motion with the State Property Council, I said, effective immediately, Maple Ridge's enforcement authority will transfer to county oversight. No HOA member will ever again act without a verified permit and public documentation. That stirred the crowd. Some clapped. Others looked wary. Years of conditioning made them fear freedom. An elderly man raised his hand. "Dr. Mercer," he said, "doesn't that mean the HOA loses control?" "That's exactly what it means," I replied. "You don't need control. You need community." The audience murmured again, louder this time. The tone was shifting, from caution to momentum. Then, from the far right row, a woman stood up. She was small, nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. "My name's Linda Graves," she said. "Janet fined me for planting tomatoes behind my fence. Said it was an agricultural eyesore. I paid her $600 just to avoid more trouble." Her voice cracked. "Can I get that back?" The crowd laughed softly, not at her, but at the absurdity of the world they had accepted. "You will," I promised. "Every resident who was fined under forged or unapproved citations will receive full restitution through the board's insurance fund." Detective Quinn verified the fraud. Quinn gave a subtle nod from the side, confirming it. Ryan Holt rose next. His voice shook, but he didn't look away. "I was part of that board," he said, projecting so everyone heard. "I signed documents I never read, obeyed orders I didn't question. For that, I'm sorry. To all of you, and especially to the Mercers." A silence followed, heavier than applause. Then someone started clapping. Another joined. Within seconds, the sound spread across the pavilion, an imperfect human noise breaking months of fear. I glanced toward Quinn, who gave me a rare smile. The flash of cameras lit the edges of the crowd like lightning. For once, it wasn't scandal. It was catharsis. When the noise faded, I leaned toward the mic one last time. For a long time, Maple Ridge was a story about control, but every wound, every scar, every broken rule taught us what freedom costs when you let someone else define it. My family paid that price. Don't make it worthless. I turned, gesturing to the new board. From today forward, all HOA meetings are open record. Every policy vote will be public. You want accountability? You start by watching the ones in charge. The chairperson cleared her throat. "Would you like to close the session, Dr. Mercer?" I paused, then nodded. "Yeah." I looked out over the sea of faces, the same lawns and smiles that once hid fear. This neighborhood started as a collection of perfect fences. Maybe it's time it became a community again. The crowd stood. Applause rose like thunder, rolling over the pavilion, echoing across the lake. And for the first time since that awful day, I didn't hear the chainsaw anymore. I heard people, loud, imperfect, finally alive. A year later, Maple Ridge didn't look like the same neighborhood. The old HOA office, the place where Janet Pike once wrote her forged orders, was gone. In its place stood the Mercer Rehabilitation Center, its glass walls catching the morning sun that spilled across the rebuilt gardens. The sound of hammers had been replaced by laughter. Wheelchairs rolled along the paths where lawnmowers once patrolled. The air smelled of lilies again. Inside, I stood in the main corridor watching my wife walk. Not just balancing, walking. Her prosthetic gleamed under the skylight. Each step measured, deliberate, beautiful. The physical therapist trailed behind her, holding a safety belt, but Clara barely needed it now. Our daughter, Lily, toddled ahead of her. One step, then another. Both of them learning to move through a world that had nearly taken them down. "You're watching too closely," Clara teased, steadying herself against the railing. "You look more nervous than I am." "I've seen enough close calls for a lifetime," I said, smiling. She turned, catching the sunlight in her hair. "You promised me we'd rebuild," she whispered. "I just didn't realize you meant the whole town." Outside the window, workers were planting the last bed of lilies near the entrance. Each one had a small tag that read, "Bloomed under pressure. Still standing." Down the hall, Detective Mara Quinn approached, holding a file. Her posture was as straight as ever, but there was a hint of warmth in her expression now. "You've got a visitor," she said. "Another reporter?" I asked. "Not this time." She opened the door, and Ryan Holt stepped in, wearing a volunteer badge. "We could use some help with the new accessibility ramps," he said awkwardly. "Figured I owed a few more good deeds." I extended my hand. "You owed yourself a second chance," I told him. He shook it firmly. "We're rebuilding the HOA. Code citywide," he added. They're calling it the Mercer Clause. Any enforcement action now requires municipal verification. You did that, doctor. I just forced the wound into daylight, I said. The healing, that's everyone else. Ryan smiled faintly, then turned toward the window. You ever think about leaving Maple Ridge? Every day, I admitted. But then I remember what it became after we fought for it. Sometimes victory isn't about escape, it's about reclamation. Quinn leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. You know, I've seen hundreds of cases like this end in bitterness. People want revenge. You went for reform instead. Why? Because revenge doesn't grow anything, I said. But justice, it plants roots. She nodded slowly, the faintest glimmer of respect in her eyes. You ever think about politics? Never, I said with a smirk. But I do like fixing broken systems. Later that evening, the community gathered by the lake for the first Maple Ridge Memorial Walk, a tradition Clara started. Residents carried candles down the same trail that used to lead to the old HOA clubhouse. Some were new families who'd moved in after the scandal. Others were the ones who'd once stayed silent. The path shimmered with light reflected off the water, every flame a quiet apology. Clara stood beside me, holding Lily's hand. When she spoke, her voice carried easily across the crowd. A year ago, I thought this place would destroy us, she said, but it didn't. It showed us what we could become when we stopped being afraid. Applause rippled through the night. Someone shouted, "To the Mercers!" And for once, it didn't feel like pity. It felt like belonging. As the crowd began to disperse, I stayed by the lake, watching the candles drift out into the dark. One of them caught on a ripple and floated toward the far shore where the old HOA building once stood. For a moment, it looked like a single star reclaiming a sky that had forgotten it. Clara slipped her arm around my waist. You know, she said softly, you could have just moved on, started over somewhere else. I looked down at her, then back at the quiet homes lit by lantern light. Maybe, I said. But then, who would have taught them that authority doesn't mean ownership? She smiled. You sound like a judge again. Just a husband who refuses to let a boundary line define decency, I said. The last candle winked out in the distance, and the lake fell still. Tomorrow, the center would open officially, and survivors from other neighborhoods would arrive. People silenced by their own HOAs, ready to tell their stories. Maple Ridge had become more than a neighborhood. It was a warning carved into law, a promise written in healing. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.